at the rate that CPI is, then we'd have $3,200 more per pupil right now. The state budget right now, once we get to the beginning of the 23-25 year, so come June 30th, the projected state budget surplus, as defined by the Wisconsin Department of Administration, is going to be at $6.6 billion. They have a $1.7 billion rainy day fund for a combined surplus of $8.3 billion. We're not asking them to spend all of that. We're saying, could you find a way to use some of that, though? Okay, to collect all that tax and then to sit on that tax, I don't think is the right thing to do. I think they have a duty to find ways to invest in the state. I understand there's a lot of different departments they must fund: transportation, corrections, UW system, K-12. I don't envy the job they have, but that's nonetheless the job they chose to do. I ask that they consider using some of this surplus here as they write their next state biennial budget. The Department of Administration was quoted as saying the state is in its strongest position in its history. So that's kind of a history of where we've been, where we are, kind of where are we at and going for the next year or two. I'll talk about that right now. This is our budget calendar. So as we move forward right now, in January, I gave you a preliminary snapshot of the budget, okay? In February, I worked to give our schools and our departments, we'll talk about that at school level budgets here coming up on the agenda. I sent out preliminary budgets to our directors, our principals, and our supervisors for what they're being allocated. We're going to present the Buildings and Grounds budget tonight. In April, we'll approve our health insurance plan. We send out contracts to our teaching staff. By law, we have to issue these by May 1st. Sean, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, actually, no.
What's the deadline on that, though? I know there is one.
So May 15th?
May 15th, thank you.
We send them earlier.
Sure. So we have to send them out in May, all right? And after we do that, those contracts that we send out say that you have a position for 23-24. Here's the salary you received last year. Next year's contract will not be less than this amount, but we don't preemptively tell them how much we can pay. It's hard for us to commit to that expense when we don't know how much revenues we have.
And you don't have to tell us until June 15 if they're coming back.
Right. In a way, we're getting ready to launch this airplane, and we don't know how much gas we have in this thing, okay? That's the challenge we have. In May, I'll present a salary and benefits budget. We'll have our health insurance information finalized at that time, and I can give more information about what it looks like. I'll present an updated budget and tax levy in May. In June, I'll present it one last time. You can give me feedback in May on things you want changed, but in June, I'm going to say, here's the budget. I'm trying to create this thing in your vision. I need your blessing to take this in June. I need you to bless this and adopt it so I can take it to the annual meeting and present it to the electors of the school district. So every public school district will have an annual meeting. We present the budget hearing for 30 minutes, and the electors, the residents of the district, get to say thumbs up or thumbs down, we support this budget or not. It's not binding, but it's a chance for us to take a temperature on how the community feels about the work we're doing here. So that'll take place July 31st. In September, we'll have our third Friday count. We multiply that third Friday count by our revenue limit as defined by the state biennial budget. And then in October, we make things final. The DPI will certify our equalization aid or our general aid. It's the same thing. They'll tell us how much money they're going to contribute to us. We'll find our property values of 2023. They kind of give this to us 10 months retroactively. And then we finalize our budget. We finalize our tax levy. So in a way, this plane is already launched at this point, and we're just finding out where it really is, how much gas, again, we have in the tank. Carolyn?
When do I know last year with the CPI, I think it was like a 4% was their recommended.
4.7% was CPI last year.
And it's 8 this year. What meeting or what month are we talking about that to get that approved so the teachers know what their salaries are going to be?
If I had to guess right now, I'd probably say sometime in November.
Okay.
So the earlier the better for their own family planning purposes, right? Whenever we settle it, we provide retroactive pay, so we make them whole as if they were getting that rate of pay since the first paycheck of the year, which will be in August.
Is that normal for all districts? That's
No. It's all over the board.
Why?
Us in Muskego, we've tried, the second year of the biennial budget, you know what you have, so you can settle earlier. And when you can do it, again, it helps each family. But if we don't know how much money we have in this room, it's really hard to commit to that. That's the biggest line item. So us in Muskego will finalize this later, October, November, December. Some districts, like Oconomowoc is one, for example, they're finalizing that in May. To each their own.
when we hire, let's say we hire a new Spanish teacher over the summer,
Mhm.
do they get, like if we did an 8%, do they get an 8% on top of whatever we hired them on?
No, they get hired at that rate, and that's the agreement. So
after this year.
the rate of increase applies to returning eligible teachers.
Okay.
How can Oconomowoc do it in May if they don't know their equalization?
That's a great question. I have the same one. I don't know.
Okay.
You really have to, I think you have to be prepared to have a deficit budget if the revenues don't work out, and to commit before the state says, here's 10,016 is your number, add 200, add 50, add 350. You don't know. So to me, I caution against that.
All you really gotta do is accept that you're gonna have a negative budget and then have it assumed that you're going to tack on next year's taxes.
Well, you're limited. You can't, your tax levying authority is limited.
You have to cut spending then the next year.
Revenues are determined first, and then you can only create the expenditure if you have the revenue to support it. The hard part is that, you know, we're sending out contracts on May 1st. Like, this timeline does not play to our advantage. I'll keep going to the analogy of the plane is launched, we don't know how much gas we have in the tank. You don't want to be on that airplane, okay? But we'll find a way to make it happen. It's just tough. All right, so in terms of budget requests, there's a number of entities throughout the state that are going to lobby. They're legislators, no different than us. We have the Southeastern Wisconsin school administrators here in the far column. The DPI submitted their budget. The governor submitted his budget. And then the Legislative Fiscal Bureau, I'm going to reference that. I gave everybody a sheet of paper there that has some green highlights on that. I'm going to reference that in just a second here. But you can see what various entities are asking from state government for increases on the per pupil revenue limit and the special ed categorical aid. So just really kind of focusing on those two very things, okay? When we built ours, I'll show the budget on the next couple slides here. We really need at least $350 and at least 35% reimbursement in special ed to get just to a break even. And even with assuming a 4% salary increase, with the inflation going on, it's not like people are really, their take-home pay is extraordinarily higher. In fact, it's less. Everything costs more. But you can see where those other entities are asking the budget to come in. Okay, I'm going to show now on the next slide here, and let me just back up. The Legislative Fiscal Bureau, I showed that graph earlier that we'd have $3,200 more per student if we were still tied to inflation. That information comes from this Legislative Fiscal Bureau. They're kind of they are the bean counters and the actuaries and the smart people in the room for the state government. And so on the back side of that sheet, that's where those numbers come from. All right. The three scenarios I'll show in a budget, I'll show with, we talked at the last meeting that if enrollment declines by 25, it stays, you know, at its current levels and doesn't grow, or grows by 25. And within those three FTE growth scenarios, I'll show scenario one with absolutely no new money anywhere and the same special ed reimbursement rates. I'll show you what if we get $350 in each year and no increase on the special ed rates. And then the last one is if we get $350 per year plus a 5% increase in the special ed reimbursement rates in each year. So that's the information on this sheet, and that's the second handout I gave you here, okay? So No new growth, so again, this column represents decline of 25 students, 0 student growth, so it stays constant, or we grow by 25. Again, we won't know that until after the third Friday in September. The bottom line of the budget is what I have for the surplus deficit amounts. If we do, and I should say, I want to caveat this, the assumptions that are driving this are a 4% health insurance, 4% salary increase, 5% health insurance increase, and those are the biggest drivers there. We have a $2.2 million deficit in year 1 and 3.2 in year 2. Do we have the fund balance to make it work? Yes. Do we want to build a deficit budget that big? My guess is no. Okay, if we don't shrink by 25, we hold serve, our deficit shrinks a little bit. And if we grow by 25 students, our deficit shrinks a little bit. This is not where we want to be. We don't want zeros in the budget. We'll be in trouble. There is absolutely no question about it. This middle scenario here is $350 each year on the per member revenue limit. So we'd add $350 to our $10,016 in year 1 and another $350 in year 2, keeping special education reimbursements the same. You can see our deficit gets more palpable. We're down to $500,000 in year 1 and $100,000 in year 2 if we shrink by 25. If we don't grow at all, or we don't, I should say, decline or increase here, we're about in that same bucket here. If we grow by 25 students, our deficit in year 1 shrinks and we're better off in year 2. Okay? Finally, this last scenario is a $350 increase each year, a 5% increase up to 35% special ed reimbursement in year 1 and up to 40 in year 2. This scenario here is where you can see we're finally in a manageable spot. You know, when we say, hey, there's an $800,000 surplus in year 2, that's assuming a 2% increase on salaries in 24-25. That's not on. We've managed our internal budget very wisely, in my opinion. That I think there's a lot of districts whose numbers are double that because they use one-time money to fund ongoing operational expenses. We did not do that. So this tells our story. Again, we're in trouble here. I won't say we're in trouble, but we're not in the best spot here. Here is, okay, we got a fighting chance. It'd be great to give people better than a 4% raise given the fact that inflation is what it is. I think we'll try to do the best we can. At least that's what I'll encourage the board to do. So in summary,
Tom,
yeah, Sean.
I'm sorry, real quick question. Have you heard any districts in the area that are giving greater than 4%? Have you gotten any feedback from other business managers on what they're thinking?
Everybody's really shy about sharing that information right now. Some are in that 5% range. I'm not too familiar with anybody that's going way north of that. With all the uncertainty, it's one thing to commit to wages, but don't commit to a really high wage at this time. So we'll know more as the summer plays out. This will be an ongoing conversation for sure. All right, so then in summary, in conclusion then, that we've been one of the lowest funded school districts on a per student basis for 30 years. We need the 23-25 budget to provide a meaningful increase, okay? We are a low revenues district who needs fiscal resources, all right? In order to create a balanced budget for next year, we'd like $350 at a minimum per pupil and new spendable revenue and at least $35% of special ed reimbursement. What questions do committee members have, or anyone?
There was an email that, I think, Sean, you'd sent out that our legislatures haven't committed to coming to any of our meetings. Has anybody replied to us? Like, I was hoping like a Nick Reddinger, he lives in our district.
He has
Not?
not replied.
Okay.
Now, I do think, and we'll get this confirmed, that they are planning to be at the Capitol next Wednesday
Okay.
for us, for those of us who can go to Madison and visit with them. So Senator Kampenga was the only one that didn't, he was the only one that replied. And he said he couldn't come to a board meeting, but he would be, or his office said, that he would be there next Wednesday.
Okay. Yeah.
I base it on this year. Yep, I assume it's not going up or down. Now, it's gonna go up or down a little bit, but I can't, yeah. One thing that has grown, and I gotta think about, was it maybe December or January where I laid out all the major assumptions. One assumption that is going up and up is the amount. When we multiply 10,016 times however many kids are with our schools on the third Friday, that amount is about $46 million. To that amount, we add additional what they call exemptions. One of the major growing exemptions is the number of students in the Wisconsin Parental Choice Program. A couple years ago, that number was $100,000. This past year, it was $600,000. Like, that number continues to drive taxes up, and it has nothing to do with any decision that's made in here. We are told, here's how much you must add to your revenue limit to pay for students who are going to private schools. So that drives our taxes up. Again, that has nothing to do with us. But I lost my own train of thought. What the heck was your question, Dale? I talked too much. I'm sorry. Yeah. Open enrollment counts are assumed to stay the same. So I think there was 609 coming in and 300 and change going out. We just leave it at that.
All right, buildings and grounds?
All right. All right, so buildings and grounds budget then, we're looking to kind of tip the first domino here for next year's budget. So we do this because it gives Andy Wagner the ability to plan ahead in years where there's certain projects that we really need to get done. This current school year, we did a new parking lot at Rolling Hills. That thing was at the end of life here. I'll just make this a little bit bigger here for everyone to see, but our budget for buildings and grounds is partially funded what's in Fund 10 and Fund 41. So for Andy's operating budget here, okay, that's to pay for the supplies needed for the toilet paper in any building, or the hand sanitizers, the chemicals to clean our floors, to sanitize our rooms, to do all those things here for the grounds purposes, to make sure grass is growing where it needs to grow. That's a $500,000 budget, so we're not looking for an increase. We've let that flat for a number of years. In Fund 41, when we get our $10,000 in funding per student, we set aside a certain amount of money. And without going into the details tonight of why, we could leave it in Fund 10. It works all the same in terms of paying the bills. But this helps us increase our general aid. When we spend a certain amount of money out of Fund 41 instead of Fund 10, we can basically keep taxes down and keep aid up. That's always my goal, is to try to take the state for as much as I can. It helps the taxpayers here. So I see that as one of the things we try to do. So that's why we take money from 10 and we put it into 41. It helps our taxpayers. But again, we're not looking for either operating budget to increase. The utility budget's the same story here. So for gas, water, et cetera, we're looking for the same budget of $1,065,000. We position this budget to handle an increase. So rates went up 11% by the Wisconsin Public Service Commission. We are able to handle that because we built, I think, a wise budget so that in a year where utilities went up a lot, we didn't have to go to teachers or classrooms or to departments and say, hey, we got to cut your budget to pay for the heating bill. So we're going to really tap this thing out, though, now. So now that we have this allocation, if rates stay up, and they likely will, we're spending every nickel of that to keep the buildings heated and the lights on. We're not asking for anything in terms of our capital budgets, and we've talked about this now for a couple meetings here. So we talked about the roof at Clarendon, a section at Mukwonago High School. We're going to defer those until we better understand what our long-term strategy is here with a potential referendum. If we don't do it, we have money set aside to commit to those costs, but that might be something that works its way in, and we'll decide that with the community's input as time goes on. So, but for now, we're simply going to defer, okay? If anything comes up, we have the resources to take care of it. So we're not scraping by. We're positioned to handle problems if they do come our way. But I'll just kind of scroll to the second page of this memo then. We're looking for the committee to recommend to the school board to approve the budget amounts you're seeing here. So from an operating budget, there's 500,000 in Fund 10, 650 in Fund 41. And then we're looking for a utilities budget of 1.065 million. Fund 41 is really the only eligible expenses that go in there are things that maintain and preserve your buildings, extend their life. You can't do it to buy equipment, but when you have failing pipes or you have whatever you might need, then it's eligible for Fund 41. Fund 46, we're not looking to schedule any projects there, so when at the end of the school year, if we have money left over, we can place it in Fund 46 to say, we know there's gonna be a project one day, set the money aside, you'll need it. But we're not gonna tap into any of that. So the overall budget amount here, when we add up everything, is $2.215 million. There's no increase from what we've done the last several years. So just keeping the budget the same. You guys have any questions about that?
So you need a motion to move this to the full board?
Yes.
Right. I'd like to make a motion that we move the 2.215 budget or $1 million budget for buildings and grounds to the full board for approval.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you.
School level budget.
All right, so Carolyn, you had some questions at the last meeting, so I'm gonna do my best to answer those right now here and create a lot of transparency around our district here. So for anybody watching at home, any of our citizens or taxpayers here, I'm showing how we define our budget here, and there's a lot of numbers on here. I'll make it bigger in just a second. So here we have all of our funds, Fund 10. This is paid for by taxpayers and general aid from the state. Fund 21 is donations. Donations are gonna come from whoever wants to donate, we'll take it. And if you have a restriction on how you want it spent, we'll live to that restriction. But this is gonna come from donations. Sometimes the donations come in and sometimes they don't, but we'll do whatever we can with the donations that we get. Special education, again, is where we ultimately just segregate those costs so we know exactly how much we spend here, because we get reimbursed a portion of those costs. Referendum debt, Fund 39, that's the amount of money that we ultimately get from the taxpayers, but we use that specifically to pay off long-term debt. All right, Fund 41 is capital maintenance. These costs that we're looking at here are all our current year budgeted amounts. This is what the board approved here last year in October, okay? Fund 46, we have our capital expansion, our one-time projects. We did a playground at Clarendon. At Eagleville, we set $300,000 aside potentially for a trailer. I know we're still trying to answer that question. I hope to help you answer that question on Monday night, but that's when you approve that, the money was set aside. We did set money aside to renovate the track at Mukwonago High School, and $75,000 was from Andy Trudell's budget. He had money left over. He redid the baseball fences there. So some of our principals will, if they have a surplus, or our budget directors, if they have a surplus, they can keep that money for a long-term project that they know they have. But then we have our food service fund here, which is paid for by food service fees. Student activity fund is Fund 60. That's for students. They sell their gold cards, they fundraise on their own, they get that money, then they get to spend that money because they raised it, it's for them. We have money for scholarships. Those funds are typically donated, but we have that in a trust so they can't be spent in any other way. Here's our post-employment benefit trust fund. That's the amount of expenditures coming out this year. And then our community service fund here, that is the cost for our 2 school resource officers. This doesn't represent personnel, because technically those school resource officers are personnel of the Mukwonago Police Department. We pay them for their service, so that's a purchase service. But you can see here from all the locations, most all the expenses are here in Fund 10. We have our location codes. 104 is our 4K program. So to our community partners, we pay $439,000. We establish a per pupil amount for those 4K students, and then we pay them each month. And then we have our principals and their budgets here. We define these. I believe our elementary students get $160 per a student. We multiply that by their 3-year average. Middle school gets $200, and then the high school gets $280. And that I compare those values to what other school districts do for their students here. But then you can see we have the middle school musical, high school musical. We give them a budget, but then we ask that they reimburse us then with their ticket revenues. We ultimately pay for their directors and their producers. And we have 4 handbooks. We have a co-curricular handbook that defines how much the school board is willing to pay for it in terms of personnel for any sports teams coaches or any musicals, directors. We have our athletic budgets, our CTE budgets, buildings and grounds here. So that's the budget that we're looking to approve. This is what we did last year. So there's some more one-time costs that we did last year that we're deferring this year. Food service has their budget. Our print media center, which is at Mukwonago High School, Pam Harris oversees food service and print media. We're a part of a purchasing cooperative, so Pam does all the purchasing of paper. That's why she oversees that. But then you can see our other locations there. We have our per student funding model at the elementary level. We haven't increased those since I've been here. Our department levels more or less have a fixed dollar amount. We review that as needed if there are increases that are needed. For example, transportation, that number's probably got to come up a little bit. I think we know that. I guess to what extent is what we'll have to answer in the coming months here. But this spells out our budget, how we build it. This is for you're not seeing salaries and benefits for personnel. You're seeing all the other costs, or budgets rather, for our departments, our schools. So do you guys have any questions about that? Just trying to be transparent, I guess, more or less here. So if people do have questions now or later, I'll take them. Okay?
Moving on to the North Prairie Police Department letter.
Oh, yeah. North Prairie Police, excellent partners. I want to give a shout out to them. I'm asking the committee to consider recommending to the full school board that we write a letter of thank you to them. When we had our traffic issues on County Road E at pickup and drop off, it was just dangerous. It was. People would speed. People were parking across the street in the neighborhood to walk their kids across. It's like this really needs to stop because something bad's going to happen. They've had a regular presence there 3 times a week at least out in front of the school at pickup and drop off. And I appreciate that. Their mere presence is letting people know don't speed there in the morning because you're going to get caught, or in the afternoon too. So that's, I really appreciate those guys. Would we be open to writing an official letter of thanks to them that the school board would sign and we'd send their way?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's move that forward to the full board.
All right. I'll write the letter and then bring it to the school board meeting on Monday.
With fixing that parking lot, has that helped with the flow, everything, people are happy?
Yes. That's still not perfect. It's way better than it was. There's no question about that. Okay. Can I get you guys to take official action on that there so I can?
I make a motion that we move writing a letter of thanks forward to the full board.
Second.
And we should send them donuts. Or bagels.
All right,
Bagels,
there you go.
bagels.
All right,
Any discussion?
But the cinnamon sugar ones from Panera.
I gotcha.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks, guys.
And finally, director's report.
Last thing then.
You're on a roll, Tom.
I know. How about that? All right. So last thing then here. So I'm just going to give you a kind of state of the union in terms of the current budget. Where are we? Are we doing okay? Are there any alarms I need to sound? And the answer is no. In the information I gave you here, so just talk about the first exhibit I give you is each of those funds I just showed you. All right, we have let me just make this a little bit bigger for everybody here. So we have Fund 10. We have our salaries, our benefits, our purchase services, so on and so forth. The way that we track our expenses here, so you can see how much money we had budgeted, how much we've expensed or are about to expense, and then how much of that budget's remaining here. So we are 2/3 of the way through the school year. We got 1/3 left as of March 10th. Okay, so we'd want at least 1/3 of the budget to remain. We're in good shape here. Okay, Now you can see for our other things, we have $79,000 of budget expenses and we're over there. Relatively speaking, we're just looking at this bottom line number right here. How much money do we have left? We have 47.6% of our budgets left. I'll come back and talk about salaries and benefits in just a slide here, but we're doing fine. I see no reason to sound any alarms. Our equipment budget, we're $11,000 over, but when we buy equipment, we're typically buying that at the beginning of the school year. We're not buying it at the end, so the fact that that budget's been spoken for makes sense, okay? We pay our insurance in quarterly installations, so after we make our last payment here, this budget will be used, okay? So we have this for all of our funds, okay? We spent more in donations, but we took a guess how much money we're gonna get in donations in a given year. I don't know, I'm guessing. Historically, it's about 115 grand. We got a little bit more. So our expenses are over, but there's matching revenues to accompany that. All of our funds are here for you, so if you have any questions, go through this and let me know if you have a question about that, and I'll explain, okay? But I have, we're doing fine. So all of our funds are there. In terms of our salaries, so there's Fund 80, that's our last one. Then I'm gonna just show here quickly how we track revenues, our salary expenses here. So I've shared this before. I did it last in January. We just completed our 19th payroll. So if we're looking back at the 8 prior school years, you can see what percent of the budget we have utilized following the 19th payroll. So we've used 62.9% of our Fund 10 salary budget. We can kind of look at our history, say here's where we were at that time and here's where we landed. And when we take a look at that, we track that. We can, right now we're saying we're gonna be at 99% of our budget used. So I anticipate even 1% under budget, is $600,000. We're close to our number on a percentage basis, but I anticipate we'll have money left at the end of the year to transfer to Fund 46 so that roofs and whatnot can be paid for. And then I have the same exhibit there for Fund 27, our salaries for our special educators. We're doing fine, okay? Carolyn, you had asked some questions about food. And here's the information here that I said I'd bring back. So we have, of all those budgets we looked at for various locations, various schools and departments, here's what was budgeted and expensed, okay? So this ultimately is $38,000, $20,000's been expensed. Out of a $60 million budget right here, this is like 0.006%, so it's a very small element of the entire budget. But you can kind of see, we've tracked this specifically to answer questions exactly like the one you asked, so we can be prepared to talk about that. So if you do have any questions or concerns, just let me know, now or later.
So that is just food?
Mm-hmm. Yep, correct. So some of these are going to be for student rewards. PBIS is, positive behavior programs we have in our schools, our principals. So when you look at Office of the Principal, Sean Waller at Big Bend Elementary is going to use his discretion to say, hey, order Domino's for these 5 kids. They did X, Y, and Z really well. Let's give them a little reward. Okay, sometimes there's an after-school staff meeting. That's, the instructional staff training. You can see like that's what that would be for, okay? Food makes all meetings less horrible. Sometimes you gotta have some. We did it at our last meeting last month, okay? All right, so there's that. And then the last piece, Carolyn, you asked about just bidding. So I brought this information, Policy 6320, to talk about our bidding procedures. In a nutshell, we'll get quotes, which is just, it's not a formal bid by a vendor, but if something is under $5,000, we're gonna grab 3 quotes, make sure we're getting a good price and we're not just taking the first quote that we see. We do our homework there, and then if we can get 3 quotes, we'll make the best decision. If we're going beyond $5,000, then we're gonna go to bids, okay? Sometimes somebody who's offering something, like if there's an out-of-district placement for a certain student, there's really just one school that can service that kid, and it's really hard to get bids on certain things we do in education. So sometimes there's only one bidder, but whenever we can get bids, we get bids, okay? So that's our policy there. Emergency purchases then, if something crazy goes down, Andy Wagner has to do a building project. If anything is made in excess of $5,000 in terms of an emergency purchase, we report that to the finance committee, okay? So everything there is kind of spelled out for you there on how we go about that. So I just want to share that, and it's good information for anybody there. And that's the director's report. I don't have anything else. You guys have any questions about anything?
I've been wondering, every time we have the meeting and talk about what we're gonna do with the middle school, we have one contractor here. How does that work? I mean, is it just the assumption that?
No.
So what,
There will be an RFP that will be put out, and there will be a very competitive bid that takes place on that. I think the worst thing you could do, and this has happened in certain school districts where they choose the construction manager. We're gonna bid out the architect work and the construction manager's work. And there's 16 acceptable profit pockets that construction managers are gonna have. They're not gonna do the work for free. There's gonna be a profit for them, but it needs to be acceptable and not excessive. So we take bids and we look at all 16 of those pockets to say what's the best thing for the taxpayer, and we go with the most competitive.
so whenever we do the stuff with the, is it Bray?
Bray is the architect, C.G. Schmidt is the construction manager.
So we're paying them?
No, they're doing that work for free. They are trying to,
So they're getting the good graces?
Yes.
I mean, it's gotta happen. I mean,
Yes.
you don't get all this stuff for, you don't get anything for nothing.
no.
But the goal for them is like, we price things according, and we know that we have to put all.
Yep,
this stuff.
we keep it very honest. Now, before I came here in 2015, Sean, who was our construction manager then? It wasn't C.G. Schmidt, but we made a change to C.G. Schmidt, and we were with VJS.
That's who did the high school?
No, we were with them.
So Voss Jorgensen was the architect, or I'm sorry, the construction management firm that worked with us to build Rolling Hills. And so they did some work with us after that, and as we were preparing for the high school referendum, they were doing the same kind of work with our school board that C.G. Schmidt and Bray are doing right now. And Plunkett Rasich was our architect. And so then we put it out to bid, and through that competitive bid process, then we selected a new architect and a new construction firm,
Who did the high school?
Bray
This-
and C.G. Schmidt.
That's who actually built it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't the ones doing the, good.
So that those RFPs, those requests for proposals, those will be going out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, so Kurt
And-
Wiebelhaus, who was Andy's predecessor, and we all know Kurt from the work he's doing, his role and what he does for his school district, if there's one way you could spend money in a way you don't intend to, but you're not stretching the dollar as far as it can, you're not being as efficient as you can be, it's when you get into big dollar projects. Kurt is masterful in making those contracts to the best of our advantage. Without driving, the construction manager to like where they're not making money, there's a balancing act that takes place, and Kurt makes it happen. I've recommended Kurt to every school district that's looking for somebody like him, because prior to him, there wasn't very many people that could be an owner's rep that would really represent your best interests in those high, when you're doing a $49.5 million referendum. Be efficient with that money. The taxpayer expects it, and that's exactly what we'll do if we go down that path.
So he's our representative?
He represents us and our interests.
Okay.
And he's experienced enough. He's sat on one side of the table, now he sits on the other. He's been on both sides, and he understands it. So he's, in my opinion, worth every nickel.
I was wondering, I didn't understand the relationship if he worked with them, or if he left our district and went and worked with them, or so he left our district, started his own gig, and so he'll work with them, he'll work with the,
Yep.
Voss Jorgensen,
No.
he'll work with all these different places to make sure that they're efficient, he's working with them, but for us.
Yep, so like when change orders take place, he reviews those change orders. Why did we deviate? Why are you billing us extra? Get that okayed by somebody knowledgeable like him who can dedicate the time to overseeing, you know, a $50 million project. And
Is he a one-man band, or does he have a team?
his team is growing, but it's pretty much him.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Ink paper, typically every teacher is gonna get like a $400 budget that they can use throughout the year for whatever they know their kids best and they know what supplies that they need. But yeah, copy machines, there's some bigger expenses that need to take place. You know, with what we did with Clarendon, now we as a school board fronted the money for their playground, but Ms. Kaplan will be paying us back in her budget. She set some money aside, but she has her budget to do those things. Some business managers will say if you haven't spent it by March 31st, I'm taking it back. But those principals know their buildings better than I do, you know, to an extent. So I don't want them to spend their money quickly, say, oh, the budget's gonna be taken away, I'm gonna go buy a whole bunch of whatever. Do the right thing, put the money to the side, save up for whatever you need, a library renovation, a playground. What do you think your kids need? So I try to empower the principals and those who know what the kids need best to do the right thing. So that's how we've done it. So yeah, but they do pay for ink paper. Yep.
We had talked about the roof over in Clarendon and part of it on the, have you, so you're doing that based off of the lifespan of the roof?
Andy, I'm going to give you the microphone here so everyone at home can hear you.
So I use Interstate Roofing Consultants to be our owner's rep per se, or our consultant for all our roofs in the district. And Kurt was using them, and I believe Bob was using them prior to Kurt.
Are they a roofer? Do they consult and do roofing?
Yes, they do our minor repairs, and then they do roofing, yes. I mean, they consult all the jobs, they bid out the jobs for us. I wouldn't be able to write the spec for a job to be bid in roofing. They know all the language to put that spec together, so they.
Are you familiar with roofing consultants?
That's what they are.
No, so it's a company.
Okay, I am not
Well,
familiar
there's
with.
a company called Roofing Consultants.
Okay.
It's Lou Yeoman, and they don't do roofing.
Okay,
They'll do exactly what you need.
yeah.
Without a bias without even any perceived bias. I mean, if you get me out and I'm like, yep, need a roof. It's very easy for me to tell somebody that they need a roof on their
Right,
house,
so
or they don't.
I would say that this company is not doing they're not just telling me I need a new roof, because they're not the ones bidding.
So they don't bid any of
They don't bid the roof to do the work themselves. They're just bidding they're putting the bid together for companies like yourself to bid the job.
Oh, so they have no vested interest in.
Correct.
Okay.
And so like this last year, I did a lot of thermal imaging on a lot of the roofs just to get a better idea where we're at in our roofs. So again, I could say a roof is at 20 or 22 years old. Maybe it's getting due for a roof, but it's in good shape. And others, like Rolling Hills, for instance, is 22 years old. And there's certain areas that are failing on it, but they're repairable to a couple grand a repair versus putting $1 million into a roof. So try to extend the life of the roof by making some small repairs, finding them, doing some of this extra work. I do a walkthrough of all the roofs with the consultant every summer, just to get a better idea. How did we make it through winter? What are some of the minor things that we need to do to repair them? And then as we start seeing more degradation to the roofs, that's when we start putting the plan together to say we need to replace them.
Okay.
So,
And they don't have an opportunity to bid on it.
no, they don't.
Excellent. That seems like a good system.
Yeah.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.